And I'm Kate O'Connor. I am the chair of Animation UK. Last year, I sat pretty much in this seat, I think, on this stage, with an equally impressive bunch of people from the industry. And we announced the formation of Animation UK, literally 12 months ago. We took on the mantle of turning what was a fantastic, effective lobbying and campaigning group into becoming a stable trade body representing the needs of the animation industry, production and distribution, and being the voice of animation to really press home the needs that we have to support our fantastic, eclectic, iconic, amazing animation sector. 10 months in, it's been exhausting, mainly representing your views at the various government departments and tables in relation to Brexit, but also now looking to some more positive developments that we're hoping to push forward on your behalf over the next few months. But obviously, nothing is as pressing as the issues that we're all facing in terms of Brexit, and also the very positive points that Tom was making in terms of being part of Europe and continuing to see the potential as well as the pitfalls, to summarise this session. And we've got an amazing panel here this morning to talk about that. I'm not going to read out their biographies. Everyone's agreed that I could miss that point. So we have Phil from Jellyfish, Louise from Barenbag, Phil from Factory, so we're blessed with two Phils, and Tom, who has just been introduced. The way we thought we'd play this session was, it's quite a big topic, so we chunk it up. We'll ask our panelists to just do quick fire, a minute and a half, personal and company views on three quite biggish issues, which link beautifully to the Animation in Europe agenda. And then, instead of waiting until the end to bring in questions or comments, we'd like you to participate throughout. So the three topics we'll talk about this morning are, one, this general notion of partnerships. How can we maintain? What should we do? How do we develop our presence and our attractiveness within Europe, given the context of Brexit? That's topic one. Topic two is, how do we, what do we think? How do we deal with issues of recruitment, migration, but also skills development and talent pipelines for our industry in the UK. And topic three is the third topic that Tom mentioned as well, and we hadn't joined this up at all, so it's beautifully symmetry, is about the money. Where's the money coming from? What are the co-investment, co-production alternatives to, say, creative media funding opportunities, or are we seeing that as a huge issue? So I'm going to hand over to the panel. As I say, they will spend a minute or so saying what their views are on each of the topics, and they'll open up to you to comment. The final panellist that we had here today, which is why I was a bit cheeky and did a bit of a promo for Animation UK, but it wasn't half as brilliant as Tom's, was Helen Brunsden, was also supposed to be on the panel, for unexpected and personal reasons can't be, and so she was always going to do the Animation UK response to some of the issues raised, and I'll try and weave that in, but mainly we want to hear from the industry folk themselves and you. So that whole issue, Phil, we'll start with you, and I'll reverse that order for another topic. That whole issue of partnerships, quotas, our attractiveness, your views.
Well, Jellyfish, we're primarily right now a service business, so our concerns are very much about keeping the talent and engaging with European talent. So as far as, we've been looking at this issue now ever since the referendum, and the technology we've been putting in place in our company allows us, and is going to allow us, to be very flexible in the way we work. So we're very much focused on we don't only want to create IP, we want to make it, and that may be doing it in partnership with Europeans or global companies. But we are very focused on, we have to keep making it ourselves. We don't want to getting into situations where we are, which is like, I don't want to say the bad old days, the days when you generate the ideas and have it made in Asia or Canada. And I don't think I can't see that coming back, because I think they don't particularly want to engage in that either without any IP. So that, I think, is a big challenge for us. It's keeping the UK making stuff, but still having access to the European talent. And technology, I think, is a key way that will allow us to do that. So what we've been doing is developing stuff, very interesting stuff in the cloud, which allows us to have people working in Europe or wherever they are, pop-up studios, which has been a big issue in the past because infrastructure is such a major barrier to doing that in our industry. So, on a positive note, that's what we still think we can engage in Europe in that way, as well as keeping the UK students and talent that is here occupied rather than them going elsewhere, because the industry shrinks here as a result of Brexit. So, that's, I think, in terms of engaging with Europe from our perspective. Of course, it's also carrying on going to Annecy, Cartoon Forum, all the European conferences and symposium, and keeping those partnerships going. I mean, that's obviously critical to keeping, otherwise business as usual from that point of view.
Yeah, which is why it's so important that Animation UK is part of Animation in Europe, and that macro level partnership continues. We're absolutely thrilled about that. Louise?
I was just going to second that. I think it's really important for the UK now to really establish close relationships with Europe and really to position itself very firmly part of Europe, irrespective of what the legal and financial policies decide. But at an EU level, I guess one of the key concerns is obviously on the subject of quotas.
Yes.
And British companies qualifying as EU content, because that filters down right through to the financing of projects. So I think it's really, really important for the creators of content to have really, really close relationships with broadcasters in Britain, working with them. What steps are they going to take? How are they going to react to what is decided at an EU level? I think there's also an opportunity just in terms of partnerships across Europe, and really the UK positioning itself as still very much a close friend of the EU, to work with the EU in terms of potentially, taking the digital single market, for example. If they work closely with the EU on that, they might get some concession on quotas. So it's going to be down to negotiation, give and take, compromise. But I think showing a willingness to do that might protect some of the business in the UK, and the UK being recognised as EU content for the purposes of financing projects.
Fantastic. Thank you. Really important. Phil?
Good morning, everybody. With respect to partnerships, animation and animated series by definition is a partnership scenario where we have broadcasters, financing partners, potentially co-production partners. I actually think that as a UK industry we've been pretty rubbish at partnering with respect to co-production in Europe, and I think that's largely down to the fact that we really only have one place to go to pitch a series right now in the UK, and that's with the BBC. And understandably, their primary concern is commissioning content that kids in the UK can relate to, and as a consequence of that, I think some of the overseas broadcasters in Europe, have perceived British-made content or English-made content to not be that European-friendly. I think there are cultural differences in terms of editorial, script writing, and different sort of sensibilities when it comes to the creative. And I think we've been really poor at that. Even though we've attended, Cartoon Forum, many projects have got off the ground by way of that route. I still feel that there's been a reticence to embrace and work with broadcasters in Europe, and I think that's a key point that I think we need to develop further, and we need to get better at that. Otherwise, I think we're gonna really struggle.
Thank you. That's Great. And Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's the point about UK content qualifying as European. It by definition does. And I think it's been confirmed several times. I don't think it's a point of negotiation. I think it's a point of fact. And if you want to further strengthen that, if you do a 3, and that's under the definition of the Council of Europe, and so which is broader than European Community. I mean, we were exposed to that quite directly as we were. When Brexit was voted for, we were in the middle. We were just waiting to get a final confirmation from Disney about starting a production in the UK, and they actually said point blank to us, "Well, we need to look at this first. We're not going to greenlight it if it's based in the UK." And so we ended up actually taking it to Dublin and setting up a studio there. But in the meantime, when they came back to us, by the time we couldn't move it back again, they actually said, "No, you were right." It's like, I know, it's like, that's nice to get. It's just a pity because the production could have has stayed in the UK. But even a group like Disney did their research and saying, no, for all the content obligations that, whether it's Cartoon or Nickelodeon or Disney have when they buy a show for the whole of Europe, for it to qualify as European content in France, Italy, Spain that have such quotas, UK content will always qualify as being European, and therefore after Disney keeping that position for, I don't know, it was 8 or 12 weeks, anyway, they came back from that and actually confirmed, no, you actually, whatever happens with Brexit, UK content will qualify as European for those purposes. Now, the challenge is in the co-production treaties, is that also the case? In all the co-production treaties is like if the UK is the third party to it and that has nothing to do about the size, then it automatically qualifies as well. So I mean, there is instruments already. And from our perspective, we do co-productions with people from around the world all the time, and it's part of what makes it fun is to find a way to make it work. And so we've been able to do Chilean, Brazilian, UK co-productions without the treaties being in place. So there is always a way to do it if it's the right project and you want to do it. But yes, let's try and look at not create hurdles where they don't exist today unnecessarily if it can be avoided. And let's see if, it's very hard to say today whether that's an option, but I think an ideal situation would be to find a scenario where the UK actually stays, basically buys itself into a membership of Creative Europe, because that's been a system that's been working really well for the UK industry as standalone, but also for it as a partner within Europe. So I think that is a scenario that's being discussed, which I believe would be a very positive outcome.
Yep. Okay, that's fantastic. I mean, you've done almost the impossible there, which is sum up, such a huge issue in, a minute and a half each of you. These 3 topics are a bit porous, so we're inevitably going to talk about money or skills or talent when talking about partnerships and quotas. But you've heard from the panel, and we're particularly keen to hear from the audience now. And Helen, had she been here, would have talked a bit more about the smaller studios or even individuals. You've got some big players here. So what are your views or questions to the panel about our attractiveness, our positioning, the potential around continued partnerships in Europe, and our need, as several of the panel members have said, Louise included, to negotiate heavily and hard but with confidence around quotas with broadcasters? Views from the audience. Anyone got any questions, comments, anything they'd like to add? Greg, excellent.
I'm Greg from the CMC, and I wanted to ask about, I've completely forgotten what I wanted to ask, tax breaks. I wanted to talk about British attractiveness in these partnerships with the current system we have of tax incentives, and whether you believe we should be lobbying now to increase the tax incentives in the way they were increased in Ireland, the second the British tax break. So we're in sort of tax break war now with other territories.
Fantastic. Thank you. Louise.
I mean, yeah, I think touching on all the points that we're going to discuss, including the tax break, I think early planning and scenario planning is absolutely the step to take, and we should be doing that absolutely right now. So if Brexit does go ahead, and depending on the negotiations that come out of that, and touching on everything that the financing, where the UK sits as part of the Council of Europe, if it breaks from the EU, what impact that is going to have on its membership as in the Council of Europe. But I think absolutely as part of that, we can look at the UK tax break and plan that, okay, if Brexit does happen, go ahead. We fall out of that. How can we better the tax break? How can we make it more attractive? You know, the 80% cap in terms of eligible expenditure, potentially that falls away. So that might make it more attractive, because under that, you know, that 80% cap, which applies to Ireland as well, is EU driven. So there are absolutely ways and means that you can make it more attractive. And I think, yeah, we need to start looking at that now to make sure that we have a very competitive package to bring production here if everything else kind of falls away.
Okay. Tom, do you want to...
Well, actually, somebody, I was listening to a panel 2 weeks ago where there were representatives from the UK animation industry, and one person remarked, which I thought was, although it's at the risk of sounding cynical, since Brexit, the pound has dropped substantially against foreign currencies, which means that by default, the UK has already become much more attractive for all forms of service work for partners outside of the UK. And so even with the existing tax break on top of the reduced rate of the pound, I think you've already actually, by creating turmoil, one of the upsides is actually you're more attractive for foreign partners today. And so if you continue with Brexit, arguably, although politicians will will say the opposite, I actually think you might actually see a parity between the pound and the euro, and your competitiveness further increases. Which is, so there's all these things. It's a complex situation, and so there's upsides and downsides coming from left and right that you wouldn't necessarily think of initially.
Okay. Can I come into Phil?
Yeah, just to counter that, and I don't want to be the voice of doom all the time.
Why not? Somebody has to, Phil.
Yeah. The falling exchange rate is not such great news for European talent who come and work in the UK, and of which 40% do in our industry. In our company, out of 150 that we have working in animation, and we have 50 in VFX, a good 40% are European, and it's very hard for them having to work with a cheaper pound and therefore a cheaper euro. So so our prices go up.
But you're going to send them back home.
Sorry.
You just told us you're going to send them back home.
No, at the moment.
Good. In the short term,
they
yes,
don't
you're
have to go back
We're
home.
going to move on to this exact issue.
But we still have to pay them,
I
can't pass that benefit on.
Of course. No, listen, I think my point is that it's highly complex, and there's all these different things that influence it. So overall, yes, that makes it. Of course, that also means that if you bring
the brief we gave you as panelists was to look at the pitfalls as well as the potential, and you're doing that beautifully. Tom, you described yourself as an aggressive optimist, I think, or something this morning.
I can't help myself. Yes,
and that's great. And we all also need pragmatists and realists, and we need to have that discussion. The role that Helen would have played had she been here was to say what we're doing about some of these issues on tax breaks, Greg. And Louise, we are absolutely leading now the charge on building an evidence case and putting that to Treasury next spring to increase our tax breaks in line with our key competitors, and we'll be actively involving people in this room in putting together the evidence case for that. It is complex. It's only one factor that will support growth, but we need to be right in there with our competitors, and Animation UK is doing that now. So let's move on to, if this is okay, the skills and talent question, which includes the issues of migration and visas, as well as growing our skills and talent base here in the UK. So it's all of that in 7 minutes. Right, Phil, I'm going to start with you, because you've been very brilliant on this point recently.
Well, I think there's some good news that I think if we do a lot of work and a lot of lobbying, it does make a difference. So I think that is... and just yesterday it was announced, the government announced that they're doubling the quota for exceptional talent visa on the back of the work that we've been doing, the Creative Industries Federation has been doing, saying that we can't survive without more creative talent. So making a noise does work, and making a noise with government does work. I mean, there is a limit to those. There have to be for people that exceptional talent, for people earning over £30,000. And I know in animation, when you're taking kids out of college, they're in junior roles, they're often earning less than that, so it doesn't help with that. And I think a lot of studios in the UK do that in animation and visual effects. So, but at least they're listening and they're reacting, and we can make a difference. So that's fantastic. Obviously, it's a huge topic, and we could have a whole panel on this for hours. And I'm very passionate about keeping the industry alive in the UK. And what sort of animation industry do we want in the UK? Do we want something that is just back to creating ideas and then getting it made elsewhere? Or do we actually do what the reason the government brought in the UK animation tax credit 5 years ago, which is actually to grow the industry and to provide jobs for people in the UK? And that's what we should be doing. And the great thing is that when we do that in the UK, we create amazing content. When we have the creative talent and the developers here working alongside the studios, in the studios, working and making content exclusively here, where it's all in one building and we don't have the disconnect, and we have access to the best talent and we're able to do that, we make the best work, and we can make it viable for the sort of budgets which are very, very challenging and only going to get more challenging that we have. So I think it's really that for me is a big thing. How do we want the industry to look in the UK, and really, really working hard to make it viable for that to continue.
Yeah.
So that's,
excellent.
There's a lot more to say, but
yeah, as you said, this is huge. This is kind of Brexit in Europe made simple. But Louise, can you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think assuming a hard Brexit goes ahead, nobody knows what will come of that. But assuming that does happen, I think this will have a major impact on the industry here. But I also think that there's opportunity for bodies like Animation UK to start now lobbying, putting down on paper what actually is needed to be maintained for the business going forward, and to bring that as part of negotiations. Because, we talked about earlier, quotas, we talked about co-productions, we talked about creative media, Creative Europe funding under media, and they're all directives typically of the Council of Europe. And typically for those to be in place as well, they would require free movement of people around Europe. So if we're saying that we want to hold on to this funding, we want to hold on to these co-production opportunities, well then maybe we can lobby with the British government to allow for free movement of people. So I think it's identifying those opportunities early on, now putting down on paper and lobbying with the government that when they are going into these negotiations with Europe, that these are the conversations that they're having and these are the factors that they're considering. I think then also we can look at training opportunities. So we can, give and take and say, okay, if we can allow maybe 50% of people to come from Europe, we're committed to training the local people as well up in these, exceptional skill sets. So I think there are opportunities there, but I think we need to be clever in looking at what the risks are right now and putting stuff on paper and lobbying the government to act on our behalf in terms of these negotiations.
Yep, okay. And now is the time.
Now is the time.
Thank you. Phil.
And Ken, am I correct in saying that the Screen Alliance that Animation UK is part of is actually doing inventory just to actually be able to quantify the issue to government and basically be able to give a picture of, if you look at a studio in the UK, what is the makeup, where does the talent come from, to make it concrete rather than theoretical?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we're, when I was doing my little bit, going to do my bit at the end to say what we're doing about these issues, Animation UK is part of the UK Screen Alliance, the mothership, if you like, of our trade body, and that represents film studios, VFX and post-production. Collectively, we put in a very strong response to government consultation, the Migration Advisory Council, and came through with some hard-hitting and very compelling statistics about the current makeup of the animation sector and VFX and post. And yes, that getting to the table and getting the ear of government is what we're all about. Joining up across some of these issues, as Louise said, is I think the next step, and that's a really good steer. we'd like Brown Bag to be involved with us in doing exactly that. But yes, we've put in a good response, and we work with bigger organisations who've got even more punch and weight across the whole creative industry as well. But Phil, let me turn to you before coming to the audience.
The biggest issue that, from a producer perspective, that I face on a daily basis is attracting and retaining talent. And it's the thing that has sort of kept me up at night for the last 7 years since we started Factory. We employ over 100 people now, and we have done so for pretty much for the last 5 years. There's two sides to this. Because of the precarious nature of the animation industry, it means that we're a bunch of freelancers in terms of our mentality. And we keep talking about, this is an industry. The reality is you need some, concrete foundations and a true pipeline in order that you can build an industry. We tend to lurch from production to production. Don't get me wrong, we've been incredibly lucky to have managed we've been fortunate that the pipeline has flowed over the last 5 years, which has meant we can retain people in studio. But the reality is, I was saying to Mole earlier, who's worked for us in the past as a director on Clangers, he said, "How are things going?" I said, "Fantastic. They're brilliant at the minute. I can see the next 3 years because we've been fortunate enough to secure some business that gives us that longevity." Had Mole asked me 4 months ago what the end of the year is looking like and the future years are looking like, I'd have said, honestly, I don't know. And that's a fundamental. I'm sure we've all been faced with that. So to say that we're an industry, we need to ensure that there is a stronger pipeline of content. So then we can attract talent, and in turn for that talent. And let's face it, in a creative industry, in creative studios, we're all about the people. Yeah. The value in our business is all about that creative talent. And if at the end of every project there's a brain drain because you're not able to retain them because there's no cash flow or investment to keep them there, then frankly you don't have a business. And that's for me the crux of this. And in the last, and again, just doing a quick analysis on the Clangers right now, 50% of the animation team are from Europe. We were able to take on a project for Disney a couple of years ago, and it was a quick-fire project. And because it was in stop motion, almost by definition, there's a nomadic pool of talent that migrates around Europe, working on feature films and series in Spain and Germany and Holland and so on. And we were able to draw on that talent pool pretty quickly in order that we could skill up to produce that project. And I'm really concerned that we're not going to be able to do that in the future. So as a business, it's so precarious. Okay. And these are some of the big things that I'm concerned about.
Okay. I think slightly more pitfall than potential in the responses there. But any questions or comments from the audience? Thank you, Sire.
Hi. It's a question about the kind of the nature of the talent, because I kind of have the same problem bringing people into technology, and there's a kind of question about, are we being a little bit cynical about this? Because on the one hand, there is a real concern, certainly within the kind of graduate population in the UK, that they can't get jobs. Yep. And then on the other side, we're saying we've got a big problem because we can't ship people in from outside the UK. So what is this about? Is it the nature of the talent, or are we being slightly cynical about the cost base?
Okay, good question. Thank you. Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, this is obviously a subject that comes up a lot, and I think there's several things to say, really. That we work and have been working really hard in engaging with universities, colleges, and Animation UK does, Creative Skills Set did, to let them know what we're looking for, and recently with government as well. I think there's some intrinsic issues with the UK when it comes to education in art and technology. And I think the new buzzword is creative tech, and that is something that we all have to wheel out, because government listens and you say anything to do with tech, and if you align creative with it, sounds great, and they suddenly think, yeah, we've got to listen here because that's the future. And the creative industries are worth about 87 billion. That's just a side thing. It's huge. It's a really, really important sector in the UK. It's massively important. So how do we foster and generate the sort of talent that we need to continue thriving in the UK? And I think that there are several strands to this. I don't think we will ever get to a point where we can be totally self-reliant on UK talent. That's just fantasy. It's not going to happen, and we won't be the best in the world if we do that, because we won't be benefiting from the diversity, the cultural mix.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're setting up a football team, you're not going to get all the best players in the world who are British. There's no reason why it's going to be any different than what we do. If you're setting up an orchestra, the same thing. You're not going to get the best violinist soloist who's necessary from the UK. The same happens in our industry. That's particularly in the highly skilled areas. There are, things like creature TDs, effects TDs, all these areas where they're very, very skilled, and they take a number of years to skill up to that level. And the statistics from the MAC report were showing that up to 80% in these skill areas are European in the UK. Out of 5,000 or 6,000 people who work in just in London in visual effects and animation, up to about 80% in these highly skilled areas, and that is the major concern for us.
Is that specialised in?
Well, because it takes a number of years. They specialise in it, and there is in European culture, there's much better emphasis on art and much better recognition of art, creative, mixed with STEM. So STEAM is what we like to call it, from an earlier age. And that is something that, my kids have gone through school, state school in London, in the UK. They're both artists, and the younger one now is in his last year at school, and he is doing art, but he's never encouraged to do it, and it's pretty badly taught. There's just a depressingly low emphasis on that. So we're dealing with an intrinsic issue, a generational issue that is not going to be solved for 12 to 15 years. So we have to do a lot of work with schools outreach, with getting kids into our companies, which we do, with engaging with government and education, trying to make them aware of where the gaps are. So I think that it's not something we're going to solve quickly. So we need some interim measure, but we must also continue to have access to the talent from abroad. So I think there's 700 graduates coming out in visual effects and animation in the UK every year. So for us as companies, we haven't got time to see the wood from the trees. We can't sift through. Unfortunately, there's and this is something else we're saying very strongly to them, that it's not. You don't have to spend more money on this type of education. The emphasis is all wrong. It's about quality, not quantity, and that's where it's been wrong. And there should be centres of excellence in the UK, because we go to colleges like Gobelin, to Super Infocom, to Animation Workshop in Denmark, to the Berlin, the Film Academy. Those are places where 90% of graduates are fit for purpose, they're ready to go. There was something brilliant that Creative Skills Set did a while ago called Trainee Finder, which the courses are longer in Europe, so they're educated to a higher degree. They go into industry more, so they're doing things that UK colleges are starting to look at and say, we've got to copy that, and we're telling them they need to copy that. But it's really going on. But it's media. Often it's people who don't know what else to do. They say media studies, so we're going to do animation.
Right. So I'm going to stop you there, because this could have been, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to take even one more question on this, but I will at the end, because this is such a big topic, and we're going to have sessions throughout the day on skills and training. It's not just squeezed into this 10 minutes now. So hold those thoughts. And just to say, because I have to do this, I'm plugging Animation UK's activity. We are are absolutely on both sides of that coin. Arguing for ongoing migration flexibility in numbers, but also helping to develop our skills base here. And our next development will be exactly along the lines of Phil's points there, to work with the best of our schools, to raise the game, to get internships and supported trainees into our studios, to start that pipeline, but it's probably a 5-year programme before we can see real results of that. Right, we're going to do the third topic, I'm sorry, but it has been, sorry, Tom, I should say, and the questions at the back. The third topic has been covered a little bit already, that is investment, money. Where's the money coming? Have we got grounds for optimism here or pessimism in terms of investment within that European context? Tom, I'm going to start with you because you've mentioned this already, and we want that optimism to come back into our conversation.
I think what is hard at the moment is that because we don't know what colours of grey we might end up with, we have to assume the worst. Now, as I said, I'm an optimist by nature, and I would be very disappointed if we ended up in that situation. But that's what we need to look at. I think that the funding that comes specifically from the UK today, if you combine the tax credit with broadcaster investments and places like EIS funds, you can actually still bring a good chunk of a budget to the table. And the treaties, treaties are great to use if they're useful, but I actually pride myself of using treaties as little as possible, because generally they represent a lot of extra work and not necessarily a lot of extra resources. So I would say it's not the end of the world if you do that. And going back to what I was saying, it will remain European content. So. But it's getting access. I think what you need to worry about is if you're not part of Creative Europe, will the UK government be in a position where they can actually support particularly smaller companies that have been relying on that support to develop their own projects and get to do that next to just doing work for others.
Great. Thank you. Louise.
So I think the key risks, obviously, are kind of some of the points that we've already covered. So I'm just going to summarise them. There's the broadcaster, the quotas, because I think while some companies are getting some comfort, we actually haven't even got into negotiations, so we don't know what the outcome of that is. So I think the broadcaster funding, there's risk around co-productions, because as a Council of Europe initiative, the UK could easily fall out of that. And also there could be restrictions. Whilst the UK then is free to enter into trade deals or treaties with other countries, the EU could have restrictions for their member countries in terms of entering into treaties with the UK. So that's just something to be mindful of as well. There's also the regional development funding that potentially could fall away, and then any employment support funding that comes from the EU. So I do think that there are key risks around this. But again, it's like we talked about earlier on, joining up all the dots. If the UK give on something like freedom of movement in order to get, quota recognition, in order to position itself as a real partner and wants to remain as part of Europe itself, the EU may go easier in terms of what they will allow another EU member enter, the type of agreement it would let it enter into with the UK. So where there is massive risk, there's also opportunity, but we need to start planning for those now so we can direct the British government in terms of their negotiations, and we need to essentially tell them what we need to have them on the table.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Phil, have you got anything to add to that? I'm not going to ask this, Phil.
I think we've got to take a step back for me, because the reality is, again, I'm talking from a producer's perspective primarily. It's been really tough to get animated series funded over the last 10 years. And it was a great boom when we had the tax credit, and I think that unlocked so much potential, and many series have gone into production, and I think we're now getting round to the second series potential for those productions, and I think there's still a big question mark as to whether those series are actually going to go into second series, which is where you bear fruit essentially as a company, because by then you understood whether there's any downstream L&M potential for those brands. So it's always been a highly complex and difficult thing to get funded anyway. So my concern is with we've had 2 series in Clangers and Scream Street that benefited from EU media funding, which contributed between 8 and 10% of the budgets. If we were to lose that, are we going to offset that in some way? But as Greg suggested earlier, by getting an enhanced, tax credit. Yep. It has been fantastic, the tax credit. It's been a real boom for our industry. But the reality is, less than 12 series are commissioned out of the UK, in any given year. Yep. So I go back to my earlier point with the last question. What is an industry? Is an industry founded on 12 commissions out of the UK? We have to look further. Yep. We have to form partnerships globally, as Tom has intimated. Yep. So, and that's a big concern for me.
Okay, I think that's almost a brilliant wrapping up point, which we have to, because I think we're just running out of time. But just to say, I think the panel have been absolutely superb at giving that whistle-stop tour through the issues of Europe, both the pitfalls and the potential, from knowing who we want to be, that Phil started with, what are we as a sector in the UK, through to really incisive steers from Louise on how we navigate a quite complex European set of negotiations, which are part of a macro set of negotiations, through to the real pragmatism, Phil, in terms of making sure that we've got our pipelines, our funding sources, and our serious lobbying focus on clearly. And Tom, with that major news today, that not only should we be part of Europe, we are, and Animation UK is part of Animation in Europe. And just to finale with all of these issues, of course, we are lobbying on your behalf. I've mentioned some of them, but literally this week and last week in deep talks with DCMS about what might replace the Creative Europe Media Fund. We maybe even have an opportunity to shape what that looks like so it works better for animation. So members and non-members alike, if you've got ideas about that fund, feed them through to myself or Helen, because we're actively in discussion this side of Christmas about that. By the new year, we will have got a skills plan that will address some of the short-term as well as long-term needs. Tax breaks and increasing the tax break level is very much a priority, as is something we haven't mentioned today, which is creating a new development fund so that we create a ladder of opportunity for those who want to make short-form content, develop their creative and talent teams and partnerships. And we're fantastically now keyed in to those wider European discussions. So thank you so much, Phil and Louise and Phil and Tom, and thank you for your patience in hearing lots of thoughts this morning, but maybe not being able to get at them. I think Tracy and Greg have organised a brilliant day for you to do just that. Thank you very much.